Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In our previous video, we discussed extensively the plot of the play The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Today we are going to be looking at the characters and the role that each character play in the play. So let's start with this character, Shylock. Who is Shylock in the play? Shylock is a Jewish moneylender in Venice. So, angered by his mistreatment at the hand of Venice Christians, particularly Antonio, Shylock schemes to eke out his revenge by ruthlessly demanding as payment a pound of Antonio's flesh. Although seen by the rest of the play's character as an inhuman monster, Shylock at times diverges from stereotype and reveals himself to be quite human. This contradiction and his eloquent expression of hatred have earned Shylock a place as one of Shakespeare's most memorable characters. Why would Shylock demand for a pound of flesh instead of demanding for a return of his money or maybe try to prosecute Antonio? Because he knew he was hated by the Venice Christians, Antonio and others. So it was an opportunity for Shylock to revenge that hatred against him and against the Jews in Venice. So he decided that a pound of flesh would be his demand if Antonio failed to make payment to repay the loan. Okay, so let's look at the second character. The second character is Antonio. Who is Antonio in the play? The merchant, Antonio is a merchant whose love for his friend Bassanio prompted him to sign Shylock contract and almost lose his life. Antonio is something of a mercurial figure, often explicably melancholic. And as Shylock points out, Antonio possesses of an incorrigible dislike of Jews. Nonetheless, Antonio is beloved of his friend and proved merciful to Shylock, albeit with certain conditions. Even though Antonio has a strong, passionate hatred for the Jewish people, he has no option than to borrow money from Shylock because his friend was in need of money and he has to be the surety for it. If not, Bassanio, his friend, will not be able to get the money and carry out his plans. So even though he hated the Jews, he has no any option than to borrow the money from Shylock, who is a Jewish merchant in Venice. Okay, now let's look at another character in the play, and that is Portia. Portia is a wealthy heiress from Beaumont. Portia's beauty is matched only by her intelligence. It's one of the ladies that is so beautiful and people praises her beauty. So, born by a clause in her father's will that forces her to marry whichever suitor chooses correctly among the three caskets, Portia is nonetheless able to marry her true love, Bassanio. Far and away, the most clever of the play's character, it is Portia, in the disguise of a young lawyer who saved Antonio from Shylock's knife. Portia played a lot of roles in the play. One of it is that whoever will marry her will have to choose the correct casket. And then we see characters that try to choose the correct casket, the Prince of Morocco, the Prince of Arragon, and also we saw Bassanio. And now, when Antonio was unable to repay the loan which he surety for Bassanio, and Shylock came for Antonio, it was Portia that saved the life of Antonio by disguising as a lawyer and argue diligently and intelligently in the court, demanding that Shylock must cut only the pound of flesh without any blood dropping. So how can you cut a flesh of someone and blood did not drop? and blood did not come out. So it was practically impossible for Shylock to get his demand, because certainly blood will come out, and if any blood will drop on the ground from the body of Antonio, Shylock is going to make a serious payment for it. That is, he is going to be punished for it. So it was Portia's intelligence that saved Antonio. Okay, let's move to another character. We have Bassanio. Bassanio is also a good character in the play. Bassanio is a gentleman of Venice and a kinsman and dear friend to Antonio. Bassanio's love for the wealthy Portia leads him to borrow money from Shylock, with Antonio as his guarantor. So, an ineffectual businessman, Bassanio proved himself a worthy suitor, correctly identifying the casket that contains the Portia's portrait. The Prince of Arragon was not able to choose the correct casket. The Prince of Morocco was not able to choose the correct casket, but as luck has it for Bassanio, he was able to choose the casket that has the portrait of the wealthy Portia. And so he was able to marry Portia. Can I ask you a question? Was Bassanio the real passionate lover of Portia? As Bassanio loves Portia, did Portia also love Bassanio that way? Or Portia was just on the fence waiting for any man that would choose the correct casket? Does Portia love Bassanio more than the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Arragon? That is a question for you. You can reply in the comment so we discuss it further. Now let's go to another character in the play. Another character is Jessica. Who is Jessica in the play? Jessica is Shylock's daughter, and Jessica hates life in her father's house and eloped with the young Christian gentleman called Lorenzo. Note that his father is a Jew. His father, Shylock, is not a Christian, and his father doesn't even like Christians. But see Jessica falling in love with a Christian called Lorenzo. And because his father is not in support of that, they have to elope. Alright? So the fate of Jessica is often in doubt. The play's character wonder if her marriage can overcome the fact that she was born a Jew, and we wonder if her sale of a ring given to her father by her mother is excessively callous. So we see that Jessica loves Christianity, loves Lorenzo, and that was one of the reasons why she eloped with Lorenzo, because the father was not in support of the relationship with Lorenzo. So the best way to live with the man of her dream was to elope with Lorenzo. Okay? So let's go to another character in the play. Now we have Lorenzo. Lorenzo is a young, handsome man, and is a friend of Bassanio and Antonio. Lorenzo was in love with Shylock's daughter Jessica, and he schemes to help Jessica escape from her father's house, and he eventually eloped with Jessica to Beaumont. So Jessica and Lorenzo now lives in Beaumont before the end of the play. And why did Lorenzo elope with Jessica? Because Lorenzo was passionately in love with Jessica, and Lorenzo knew that the father of Jessica, Shylock, does not love Christians, and he hated Christians as well, just as Christians hate the Jews. And he was never interested in her daughter Jessica getting married or being in any relationship with Lorenzo, and that was why Lorenzo and Jessica has to elope. Let's look at another character in the play. Now we have Gratiano. Gratiano is a friend of Bassanio, who accompanies him to Beaumont. A coarse and garrulous young man. He talks too much. And Gratiano is Shylock's most vocal and insulting critic during the trial. He does not like Shylock, and he does not want Shylock to win the case in the court. And he was criticizing Shylock even in the court. So while Bassanio court Portia, Gratiano falls in love with and eventually wed Portia's lady-in-waiting, Nerissa. Nerissa was the servant of Portia. And while Bassanio was in love with Portia, Gratiano was in love with the servant of Portia called Nerissa. Alright? So at the end, Gratiano also got married to Nerissa. Now let's look at another character. Nerissa, a young beautiful woman, Portia's lady-in-waiting and a confidant. She marries Gratiano and escorts Portia on Portia's trip to Venice by disguising herself as a law clerk and bear another name called Balthazar. You know, Portia bear another name called Balthazar when he disguised herself, and he was able to win the case in the court against Shylock. Now, Nerissa was one of the young ladies that accompanied Portia to the Venice to go and defend Antonio. Let's look at another character in the play. We have Launcelot Gobbo. Launcelot Gobbo is Bassanio's servant, a comical, clownish figure who is especially adept at making puns. Launcelot proved Shylock's service in order to work for Bassanio. He leaves Shylock's service because he was working for Shylock before. But because of the actions and behaviors of Shylock, he decided to go and work for Bassanio. And then he became Bassanio's servant. At the end of the play, he was with Bassanio. Alright, let's look at another character in the play. Now, we have the Duke of Venice. Who is the Duke of Venice? The Duke of Venice was the one who presided over the trial of Antonio. Although the Duke attempted to persuade Shylock to show Antonio mercy, he knows that Venice's commercial interests depend on a consistent application of its law. So he can't make an exemption to help Bassanio, to help Antonio, because if the law is bent for Antonio to escape, other debtors may try to escape payment, and that will affect the economy of Venice. That will affect the commerce of Venice. So Duke was hand tied that he was not able to help Antonio, but at the end, Portia was able to help and won the case. Now let's look at another character in the play. We have the Prince of Morocco. A Prince of Morocco seeks Portia's hand in marriage. The Prince of Morocco asks Portia to ignore his dark countenance and seek to win her by picking one of the 3 caskets, certain that the casket reflects Portia's beauty and stature. So the Prince of Morocco picked the gold casket, which proved to be incorrect because there is no portrait of Portia in the gold casket. Alright, let's look at another character in the play. We have the Prince of Arragon. A Prince of Arragon is an arrogant Spanish nobleman who also attempts to win Portia's hand by picking a casket. So, like the Prince of Morocco, the Prince of Arragon chooses unwisely. He picked the silver casket. Note, the Prince of Morocco picks the golden casket. The Prince of Arragon picked the silver casket, which gives him a message calling him an idiot instead of a Portia's hand. The note on the casket, on the silver casket was an idiot. So it was not the portrait of Portia. So Prince of Arragon also was not able to get married to Portia. Now let's look at another character in the play. It's called Balthazar. Balthazar, the servant of Portia, sent to obtain her letter of introduction and costume from Bellario. So Balthazar is also the name Portia takes when she impersonates as a lawyer at the court. Balthazar was the name of the servant of Portia. And when Portia was going to Venice to go and defend Antonio, Portia decided to use that name Balthazar. And that was the name she was known in court as a lawyer. But she only disguised to be a lawyer. She was not a lawyer. So Balthazar was a servant of Portia, and Balthazar was also the name that Portia used in attempt to defend Antonio in the court in Venice. And at the end, she was able to defend Portia was able to defend Antonio. So Balthazar was a servant of Portia. Note that. So in our subsequent lesson, we are going to be discussing extensively the literary devices used in the play, and as well as the themes in the play. Please subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell so that you get notified when another video is uploaded. Thank you and have a great day.